Topless confusion, hats nets, and the Clampetts' comic misreading of city fashion. I have always believed that the purest comedy in the Beverly Hillbillies arises not from the family's ignorance of city ways but from the city's ignorance of how completely the Clampetts will rewrite any idea that crosses their threshold. The moment Jethro returns from his reconnaissance of Beverly Hills restaurants and announces that the places with lines outside are all advertising topless waitress is one of those crystalline instances when the series reveals its deepest comic engine. What follows is not a cheap joke about nudity, it is a gentle, almost philosophical exploration of how language travels between cultures and how love can turn even the most worldly phrase into something innocent and oddly beautiful. I still laugh out loud softly the way one laughs at a private memory when Ellie Mae asks with that perfect, Donna Douglas mixture of curiosity and mild alarm, "What's a topless waitress?" The question hangs in the air of the empty, happy gizzard like a small bell. Jed admits he does not know. Granny does not know. Jethro, who has been living in Beverly Hills long enough to consider himself sophisticated, does not know either. Yet he is already certain that the answer will transform his failing restaurant. That combination of absolute confidence and absolute blankness is Max Baer Jr. at his most endearing. He stands there towering over the table and declares that his education, sophistication and savoir-faire will allow him to figure it out. The words themselves are borrowed finery slightly too large for him, the way a boy might try on his father's suit. I have never stopped finding that moment tender. What touches me most is the collective quality of the misunderstanding. This is not Jethro alone inventing a private delusion. The entire family leans in together, testing the phrase the way they might test a new recipe. There's only one thing it could be, Jethro announces with the authority of a man who has spent years observing the world from the vantage point of a 6th grade education. As anybody knows who's been around as much as me, that all them waitresses wears them silly little hats. The logic is airtight within its own closed system. Waitresses wear hats or nets. Therefore topless must mean the absence of those hats. The conclusion is so perfectly reasonable inside the Clampett worldview that the audience is invited not to sneer but to admire the elegant simplicity of the thought. I remember the first time I truly understood the kindness of this joke. I was much younger, watching the episode with my grandmother, who had never lived farther than 30 miles from the place she was born. When Jethro explained his theory, she nodded as if it made perfect sense. "Well, of course," she said. "Who wants to look at a woman with a net on her head while she's trying to serve you supper?" In that instant, the distance between the fictional hills of Bugtussle and the real hills of my own childhood collapsed. The series was not laughing at people like my grandmother. It was laughing with them, celebrating the way rural common sense can take a sophisticated urban term and strip it down to something human and practical. The physical business that follows is pure visual poetry. Jethro demonstrates his theory by pointing out that even Ellie Mae looks almost pretty without a hat. The line is delivered with the blunt honesty of a cousin who has never learned the art of flattery, and Donna Douglas's reaction, half pleased, half ready to punch him, is one of the small treasures of the series. Irene Ryan's granny, meanwhile, is already calculating the practical implications. If the secret to success is simply removing the hats, then the problem is solved. The restaurant will fill. The gizzards will not grow cold. The world will finally recognize the excellence of Clampett cooking. That leap from linguistic confusion to business plan is so rapid and so complete that it still takes my breath away with its comic velocity. Raymond Bailey's Mr. Drysdale is waiting just off stage, of course, and the knowledge that he will soon be forced to confront this particular interpretation of topless only heightens the pleasure. Yet in these minutes the focus remains on the family itself, turning the phrase over like a strange new vegetable they have found in the market. "How come?" Ellie Mae asks, wanting to understand the aesthetic principle behind hatless waitresses. "'Cause they look better," Jethro replies. And the answer is both ridiculous and strangely sincere. In the Clampett mind, beauty is practical. A woman without a net on her head can move more freely, can serve more efficiently, can be seen more clearly. The urban concept of erotic display never even enters the conversation. That absence is the joke's quiet masterpiece. I find myself returning again and again to the way the writers refuse to let the misunderstanding become mean-spirited. There is no knowing wink at the audience that says, "Look, how foolish these hillbillies are." Instead, the camera stays close to the family's faces as they reason their way through the problem. Jed's mild skepticism is the closest the scene comes to doubt, and even that skepticism is tempered by affection. He has watched Jethro invent careers before Double Nought Spy, Hollywood producer brain surgeon, and each time the invention has collapsed under the weight of reality, yet he never withholds his support. That steadfastness is the emotional ground beneath the comedy. The topless confusion is funny precisely because we know the family will walk through it together side by side without ever abandoning one another. Nancy Culp's Miss Jane will later arrive to deliver the correct definition, and the moment of revelation is itself a small comic symphony, but here in part 2 we are still living inside the beautiful era. The Happy Gizzard is going to become a topless restaurant, and in the Clampett dictionary that means a place where the waitresses are free of them silly little hats. I can still see Jethro's face as he reaches this conclusion, the wide, open smile of a man who believes he has just unlocked the secret of urban prosperity. Max Baer Jr. plays the moment without a trace of irony. That absence of irony is what makes the performance last. He is not performing stupidity, he is performing hope in its purest, most unprotected form. There is a deeper cultural resonance here that I only began to appreciate years after I first saw the episode. In the mid-1960s, the word topless was already carrying a charge of scandal and modernity. It belonged to the world of North Beach clubs and changing sexual mores. By taking that charged word and translating it into the language of practical headwear, the series performs a kind of comic alchemy. It drains the scandal and leaves behind something almost pastoral. The Clampetts do not reject the city, they simply refuse to let the city define the terms of the conversation. That refusal feels even now like a small act of cultural resistance, gentle and laughing and utterly without malice. I think of the many times in my own life when I have misunderstood the language of a new place and through that misunderstanding discovered something truer than the original meaning. The first time I ordered coffee regular in a Boston diner, and received a cup already swimming with cream and sugar, I felt the same small shock of translation that the Clampetts feel here. The words had traveled farther than their definitions. Watching Jethro and the family rebuild the phrase topless waitress from the ground up reminds me that language is never fixed. It is always being remade by the people who speak it with love. The scene ends with Jethro's decision to carry the news to Mr. Drysdale, at once too excited even to finish the meal of leftover gumbo. That urgency is pure Clampett. Once an idea has taken root, it must be acted upon immediately before the world has time to complicate it. I still feel a rush of affection when he declares he is not even going to take the time to eat. The boy who can consume an entire kitchen's worth of food in a single sitting is willing to postpone dinner for the sake of his new vision. That, more than any sophisticated urban theory, is the true engine of the Happy Gizzard's brief and glorious career as a topless establishment. Every time I revisit these minutes, I feel the same quiet gratitude. Gratitude for a comedy that understands the difference between innocence and ignorance. Gratitude for performers who can make a linguistic error feel like an act of love, and gratitude for a family that will always prefer their own definitions to the ones the city tries to impose. The hats will come off, the nets will be discarded, and for one brief, shining stretch of story the word topless will mean nothing more scandalous than the simple freedom of an uncovered head. In that freedom I still hear the laughter of home,